The bus rolled through the gates just before dawn. Inside, 23 German Red Cross nurses sat in absolute silence, their hands folded tightly in their laps, their eyes fixed on nothing. Nurse Erika Schneider pressed her forehead against the cold window glass, watching the wire fences pass by in the gray Texas morning. She was 24 years old. She had worked in field hospitals from Stalingrad to Normandy. She had seen men die in ways that would haunt her forever. But she had never been more terrified than she was at this moment. Because everything the Reich had told her about capture was about to be tested, and she had no idea what was real and what was propaganda. The other women whispered occasionally, anxious questions with no answers. What will they do to us? Will they separate us? How long before they start the interrogations? One older nurse, Hilda Weber, sat with her eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. She had been captured at a field hospital outside Aachen in February 1945. 3 months ago. 3 months of being shuttled between temporary holding facilities, never knowing what came next. Now they were in Texas. America, the heart of enemy territory. And the bus was slowing down. The door opened with a hydraulic hiss. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it a smell that made every woman freeze. It wasn't the smell of disinfectant or diesel or fear. It was the smell of breakfast, bacon frying, coffee brewing, bread toasting. Bread toasting. Erika inhaled involuntarily, and her stomach twisted with a hunger she had tried to ignore for months. When had she last eaten real bacon? 1943? Earlier? A voice called out in accented English. "Ladies, please step down. Welcome to Camp Hearn." The women filed off the bus slowly, uncertainly. They expected guards with rifles. They got guards with rifles, yes, but the rifles were slung casually over shoulders. The guards looked more bored and threatening, and standing beside the guards was a woman in an American Army nurse's uniform. She was black. Several of the German nurses stopped walking. One audibly gasped. Erika felt her worldview crack slightly. The Reich had taught them that black people were inferior, subhuman, incapable of positions of authority or respect. Yet here was a black woman in a crisp military uniform, holding a clipboard, clearly in charge of something. "Coffee?" the American nurse asked, gesturing toward a table where steam rose from metal urns. The German nurses looked at each other, confused. Was this some kind of trick? Were they being tested? Hilda stepped forward first. Her English was broken but functional. "We are prisoners, yes?" The American nurse nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "And prisoners get coffee." She poured a cup and handed it to Hilda. Real ceramic, not tin. The coffee was hot, dark, and smelled better than anything Hilda had experienced in years. The other nurses crowded forward, unable to resist. Cups were distributed. Sugar was offered. Actual sugar, not the saccharin substitute they had been using in Germany since 1942. Erika held her cup with both hands, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. She took a small sip, afraid it might be poisoned or drugged. It was just coffee. Good coffee. American coffee. And standing right there, watching them drink, was the black nurse with a slight smile on her face. Not mocking, not cruel, just professional courtesy. Everything the Reich taught us, Erika thought, might be a lie. The processing took most of the morning. Medical examinations first. The German nurses stripped down to undergarments, while American medical staff checked for diseases, malnutrition, injuries. Erika stood on a scale and watched the needle settle at 94 pounds. She was 5'6". Before the war, she had weighed 135. The American doctor, an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, shook his head. "We will fix this," he said through an interpreter. "You will eat well here." The women were given clean uniforms. Not prison rags, but proper clothing. Sturdy fabric, well-stitched, marked with PW in large letters but otherwise identical to what American personnel wore. They were assigned to barracks that had real beds, Not bunks, but individual cots with mattresses and wool blankets. The barracks were heated. There were showers with hot water. Hilda whispered to Erica as they made up their beds, "This cannot be real. This must be for show. For photographs or propaganda." Erica didn't respond. She was too busy trying to understand why the camp felt less like a prison and more like a military installation where they just happened to be confined, but nothing prepared them for lunch. The mess hall was a large wooden building that smelled like every good memory Erica had of her mother's kitchen before the war. The smell of real food, meat, vegetables, bread. They lined up with tin trays, following the lead of other prisoners already in the camp. The line moved them past a serving counter, where American soldiers in kitchen whites scooped food onto plates. Erica watched the woman ahead of her receive a portion of meat. Actual meat. A piece of chicken, golden brown and glistening with fat. Then her turn came. The server, a young man with red hair and freckles, smiled at her. "Hungry?" he asked. She nodded, unable to speak. He placed a chicken leg on her tray, then mashed potatoes, then green beans, then a thick slice of white bread with a pat of butter. Erica stared at the tray. This was more food than she had seen on a single plate since before Stalingrad. More food than most German civilians were eating back home. She carried her tray to a long wooden table and sat down slowly, as if afraid the food might disappear if she moved too quickly. Around her, the other German nurses were having the same experience. Some were crying quietly. Others ate with desperate speed, as if they feared someone would take it away. Hilda took one bite of chicken and had to put her fork down. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Erica reached over and touched her arm. Hilda looked up, tears streaming down her face. "My children are starving in Hamburg," Hilda whispered, "and I am eating chicken in Texas. How is this right?" Erica had no answer. She looked around the mess hall and saw American guards eating at nearby tables. The same food, the same portions. This wasn't special treatment for propaganda purposes. This was just how Americans ate. Every day, as if abundance was normal. For the first time since her capture, Erica felt something more disturbing than fear. She felt shame. Not for being captured. Shame for what the Reich had told her about America. They said Americans were weak, decadent, that their society was collapsing under the weight of mongrel races and Jewish influence. But if that was true, how did they have so much food? How could they afford to feed prisoners better than Germany fed its own people? The afternoon brought more surprises. The German nurses were assigned to work in the camp infirmary, their skills too valuable to waste. When Erica entered the medical building, she stopped in her tracks. The shelves were stacked with supplies, bandages, gauze, surgical instruments, medications, and in one refrigerated cabinet, rows and rows of penicillin vials. Penicillin, the miracle drug that Germany had heard about but could barely produce. Here it sat in quantities that seemed impossible. The American head nurse, a stern woman named Margaret, showed them the supply room without any apparent security concerns. "You will help treat patients," Margaret explained through an interpreter, "mostly minor injuries and illnesses. You will work under supervision, but you will be trusted." Trusted? That word hung in the air. Erica had been a nurse in the Wehrmacht Medical Corps. She had worked under constant suspicion. Every supply had to be accounted for. Every dose of morphine logged and checked. Theft was assumed and punished brutally. Here, the Americans were just handing them access to supplies that would have been worth a fortune on the black market in Germany. That evening, after dinner of beef stew and cornbread and more food than Erica could finish, the women gathered in their barracks. Hilda sat on her bunk, holding a letter she had been allowed to write home. One page, censored of course, but still, a letter. "What do I tell them?" she asked the room. "How do I explain that we eat better as prisoners than they do as free Germans? Another nurse, Marta, spoke up. You tell them nothing. They will think you are collaborating. They will think you are collaborating. They will think you have betrayed the fatherland. But we have betrayed nothing, Erica said quietly. We are simply prisoners who are being treated according to rules we did not know existed. The Geneva Convention, one of the nurses said. The Americans follow it, actually follow it. The discussion went on for hours. Some nurses clung to the belief that this was all temporary. A trick, a way to soften them up before the real interrogations began. Others, like Erica, were beginning to suspect something more troubling. That maybe the Reich had lied about everything. That maybe the enemy wasn't what they had been told. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. 3 meals a day, every day. Medical care when needed. Work that used their skills and gave them purpose. There were rules, of course. They couldn't leave the camp. Letters were censored. They had to wear the PW markings. But within those constraints, they were treated with something that resembled dignity. The contradictions piled up daily. A guard sharing cigarettes during a break. The black nurse teaching them English phrases with patient repetition. An American doctor asking about their training and nodding with respect at their answers. One afternoon in the infirmary, Erica was changing bandages on a German prisoner who had cut his hand in the workshop. The man was agitated, angry. They are trying to break us, he muttered in German. All this kindness is psychological warfare. They want us to forget who we are. Erica taped the bandage carefully. Or maybe, she said quietly, they are just following their own rules. And those rules, say prisoners, are still human beings. The man stared at her. You have been corrupted. Erica finished her work and stood up. I have been fed, she replied. There is a difference. By summer 1945, news began filtering into the camp about Germany's collapse. The surrender, the occupation, the discovery of the camps, the full horror of what the Reich had done. The German nurses sat in their barracks listening to radio broadcasts, translated by interpreters. Some refused to believe it. Others wept in recognition that they had served a regime capable of atrocities beyond imagination. Erica listened in silence. She thought about the food, the medicine. The rules followed even when the enemy was defeated, and she understood something that would take her years to fully process. The Americans hadn't treated them well because Germans deserved it. They had treated them well because Americans believed that was how prisoners should be treated. Period. It wasn't about earning decent treatment. It was about a society that had decided certain standards applied to everyone, even enemies, even in war. When the nurses were finally repatriated to Germany in late 1945, they returned to a country in ruins, cities destroyed, families scattered, food scarce. Erica stepped off the ship in Hamburg, carrying a small bag of possessions. She had gained 30 pounds during her captivity. She was healthy, unbroken. Her sister met her at the dock. She was thin, hollow-eyed, dressed in clothes that hung on her frame. They embraced, and Erica's sister whispered, "What was it like? Were you tortured?" Erica pulled back and looked at her sister. "No," she said. "I was fed." The simple statement contained everything: the contradiction, the shame, the revelation that the enemy they had been taught to fear had been more humane than their own leaders. Years later, when Erica had children of her own, they would ask her about the war. She would tell them many things, but the story she told most often was about the smell of bacon on a cold Texas morning, about how she had expected cruelty and found rules instead, how she had expected starvation and found abundance, how she had expected her enemy to prove everything the Reich had said about them, and how, instead, they had proven that everything the Reich said was a lie. The lesson stayed with her forever. That kindness is not weakness. That rules followed consistently are more powerful than propaganda. And that sometimes the most devastating weapon is not a gun or a bomb, but a hot meal given freely to someone who expected none. Because violence you can resist, fear you can endure, but kindness from an enemy you were taught to hate, that breaks something inside you that can never quite be put back together. And maybe, Erica thought, that was the point. Maybe that was America's real weapon. Not just industrial might or military power, but the simple, radical act of treating even enemies as if they were human beings worthy of basic dignity. The Reich had tried to teach her to hate, but bacon and coffee and bandages and penicillin had taught her something more powerful. That humanity can survive even the darkest wars, and that sometimes, in the ruins of everything you thought you knew, you discover that the enemy wasn't who you thought at all. The real enemy was the lie you had been told about them.